Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most vivid, terrifying, and honestly just densely packed piece of ancient visionary literature out there, Revelation 9. Now, instead of getting bogged down in centuries of theological debate, we're going to treat this like the ultimate piece of ancient apocalyptic literature that it is, exploring strictly what the source text describes. We're going to unpack the bizarre imagery and the fascinating narrative structure that has captivated readers for millennia. To help us navigate this surreal text without getting completely lost in the smoke and fire, we've broken the narrative down into 4 clear chronological stages. We're looking at the 5th trumpet, the anatomy of the locusts, the massive escalation of the 6th trumpet, and finally, humanity's unbelievable refusal to repent.
All right, let's jump right into stage 1, the 5th trumpet, which kicks off what the text ominously calls the first woe. So, the vision begins with this massive cosmic event. The 5th angel sounds his trumpet, and immediately the narrator sees a star that has fallen from the sky to the earth. But, this isn't just a meteorite. It's actually presented as an entity with agency. Why? Because this fallen star is literally handed a very specific object, the key to the shaft of the abyss. Right from the jump, we get this vertical connection between the heavens, the earth, and the terrifying depths below. What follows is this insane chain reaction. Once that abyss is unlocked and opened, a massive plume of smoke erupts upward. And the text specifically says it's like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. I mean, it's so thick that it actually blacks out the sun in the sky. Total sensory blackout. And then, out of that blinding, choking darkness, the real threat emerges. A swarm of locusts descends onto the earth. But as the text is super quick to point out, these are not your average agricultural pests. They're actually given power like that of scorpions.
Now, this is where their rules of engagement get truly bizarre. Usually, a locust plague is an environmental disaster, right? It wipes out crops and foliage. But here, the text explicitly states they are commanded not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or any tree. Instead, they act more like precision-guided munitions. They have one singular target. They can only strike the people who don't have the seal of God on their foreheads. So the natural world gets a total pass, while a very specific subset of humanity is targeted.
And the restrictions don't just stop at who they can target. They are heavily restricted in how long they can operate. The text is highly specific here. They aren't allowed to kill their targets. Instead, they're explicitly limited to torturing them, and the agony of those scorpion-like stings is capped at a period of exactly 5 months.
Which really brings us to the psychological horror of the text. It emphasizes that this first woe is fundamentally about inescapable, agonizing torture, not death. The narrator says people will actively seek death, they'll long for it just to escape the strikes, but death will literally elude them. It's this terrifying suspension of the natural order. The suffering is maxed out, but the ultimate escape hatch of mortality? Yeah, that's temporarily locked tight.
Moving on to stage 2. To really wrap our heads around this surreal nightmare, we need to dissect the bizarre, chimera-like anatomy of these locusts. The text gives us this masterful, almost cinematic breakdown of these creatures. Picture this. They look like battle-ready horses wearing what appear to be crowns of gold, giving off this sense of conquering authority. But then, they have human faces and hair like women's hair, creating this unsettling, uncanny valley kind of intelligence. Then add in the brute savagery. They boast lion's teeth and impenetrable iron breastplates. The auditory detail is just as intense. The sound of their wings is deafening, like the roaring of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. And of course, the weapon, those scorpion tails with stingers. It's a complete amalgamation of human, animal, and metallic parts engineered for pure terror.
Also, unlike normal, natural locust swarms that just kind of operate without a leader, this specific swarm is highly organized. They have a king over them, identified as the Angel of the Abyss. The ancient text actually takes the time to name him in 2 languages, making sure the diverse early audience knew exactly what he was about. In Hebrew, his name is Abaddon, and in Greek, it's Apollyon. Both of these translate to one very simple, terrifying title, the Destroyer. Before we move on to the next phase of the vision, let's take a second to contrast the boundaries of the first woe we just examined with the massive escalation of the second woe that's about to hit. The first was terrifying for sure, but it was heavily restricted. Localized torment, absolutely no death permitted, and a strict 5-month time limit. But as we cross over into the second woe, all those restrictions vanish. We're shifting from agonizing torture to outright extermination. That brings us to stage 3. The 6th trumpet sounds. And here, the scale of the vision shifts dramatically.
from that localized psychological horror, straight into a global event of mass annihilation. Right after the blast of the sixth trumpet, the narrator hears a singular voice coming from the four horns of the golden altar. This voice issues a very precise command: release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. Now, notice the terrifying level of predestination here. These four angels haven't just been hanging around. They have been kept ready for an exact hour, and day, and month, and year to execute their specific, catastrophic purpose. And the most crucial point here is the unimaginable scale of what gets unleashed. The text says these angels lead an army of mounted troops, and the narrator actually hears their number, twice 10,000 times 10,000. That is 200 million troops. To put that into perspective for a second, that is vastly larger than the combined active militaries of the entire modern world. For an ancient reader, or honestly even for us today, a cavalry of that size pushes the absolute boundaries of human comprehension.
And much like the Locusts, the anatomy of these 200 million horses and their riders is just bizarrely specific. The riders wear breastplates colored like the elements they use as weapons: fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. The horses themselves are pure nightmares. They have the heads of lions, and out of their mouths pour this deadly trinity of fire, smoke, and sulfur. But the danger isn't just in the front. Their power is also in their tails, which are described as being like snakes, complete with their own heads that strike and inflict injury. They are literal, multi-directional killing machines.
The devastating result of this 200 million-strong cavalry is just catastrophic. The text tells us that the three plagues pouring from the horses' mouths, the fire, the smoke, and the sulfur, wipe out a full 1/3 of the human population. So those restrictions of the first woe, completely gone. This is a global culling on a massive, mathematically devastating scale. Which leads us to stage 4. Now, logically, you would think that surviving an apocalyptic invasion of scorpion-tailed locusts, followed immediately by 200 million fire-breathing lion horses that wipe out 1/3 of the globe, you'd think that would trigger a massive, desperate shift in human behavior, right? Well, amazingly, no. Despite witnessing and surviving everything we've just talked about, the text meticulously lists what the surviving 2/3 of humanity absolutely refuse to give up. The author breaks their stubbornness down into two camps: their worship and their actions. First, they refuse to stop worshiping demons and hollow idols made of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood, objects the text dryly points out can't even see, hear, or walk. And secondly, they refuse to repent of their destructive actions, specifically holding on to their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality, and their thefts. It is just bewildering. This insane onslaught of the supernatural did absolutely nothing to sever their attachment to the material and the corrupt. And this brings us to a really profound psychological twist embedded right in the fabric of Revelation 9. It forces us to ask a tough question. Does catastrophic, world-ending trauma ever truly change the core of human behavior, or does it ultimately just reveal our deepest defiance? It's definitely a haunting thought to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep exploring.